The casket was still warm in the ground when she leaned over and whispered, "He never loved you the way he loved me." The words hit me like ice water, sharp and sudden, cutting through the fog of grief that had surrounded me for days. I stood there in my black dress, my hands still trembling from throwing dirt onto Richard's mahogany coffin, and watched as my husband's mistress smiled, actually smiled, before walking away on her red-soled heels. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 52 I had believed I knew the shape and weight of my life. I was a senior partner at Morrison and Associates, a prestigious accounting firm in downtown Seattle, where I had spent 23 years building a reputation for precision and integrity. My corner office overlooked Elliott Bay, and on clear mornings I could see Mount Rainier standing sentinel in the distance. Richard and I had lived in the same craftsman house in Queen Anne for 18 years. The one with the climbing roses I'd planted the spring after we married, the ones that now covered the entire south wall in cascades of pink and white blooms. But standing there in Lakeview Cemetery, watching Vivian Marsh disappear between the headstones like smoke, I realized I had known nothing at all. The funeral reception was a blur of casseroles and condolences. Our friends from the yacht club, colleagues from Richard's law firm, neighbors who had watched us age together over backyard barbecues and block parties. They all moved through our living room like ghosts, their voices a distant hum. I smiled and nodded, accepted their embraces, thanked them for their kind words about Richard's sudden heart attack, his dedication to his clients, his love for sailing and expensive wine. "Such a devoted husband," Mrs. Henley from next door said, pressing my hand between her soft palms. "You two were blessed to have each other." I wanted to laugh or scream or both. Instead, I offered her another piece of the lemon cake someone had brought, the one that tasted like cardboard in my mouth. It wasn't until the last guest had left, until I had loaded the dishwasher and wrapped the leftover food, that I found myself standing in Richard's study. The room still smelled like his cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and bergamot that he'd worn for as long as I could remember. His law books lined the shelves, their leather spines worn from years of use. The mahogany desk where he'd worked late into so many evenings sat exactly as he'd left it, papers scattered across its surface, his Mont Blanc pen lying beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. I had avoided this room for the 3 days since his death, unable to face the weight of his absence. But now, with Vivian's words still echoing in my mind, I felt drawn to it like a moth to flame. The envelope was in the top drawer, tucked beneath a stack of legal briefs. My name was written across the front in Richard's careful script. Margaret. To be opened only after my death. My hands shook as I turned it over, noting the way he had sealed it with the same methodical care he brought to everything else in his life. Inside was a single sheet of his personal letterhead, and a smaller envelope marked evidence. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, then I have finally run out of time to tell you the truth myself. I am a coward for leaving you to discover it this way, but perhaps death will give me the courage that life never did. For the past 4 years, I have been having an affair with Vivian Marsh. It began as most affairs do, a moment of weakness that grew into something I told myself was love, but now recognize as selfishness. She works as a paralegal at Brennan and Associates, the firm we've been opposing in the Henderson case. What started as professional contact became personal, and I allowed it to continue far longer than I should have. But this letter is not a confession seeking forgiveness. I am beyond such hopes now. This letter is a warning. Vivian has been systematically gathering information about our finances, our investments, our properties. She has accessed my computer, photographed documents from my briefcase, and recorded our private conversations. I discovered her true intentions too late. She has been building a case to claim a portion of my estate, armed with evidence of our relationship and intimate knowledge of our financial situation that she plans to use against you. In the smaller envelope, you will find copies of emails between Vivian and a private investigator she hired, as well as photographs she took of our bank statements and investment portfolios. There are also recordings she made of our conversations, including one where she explicitly states her plan to take that Ice Queen for everything she's worth after my death. I have already taken steps to protect our assets, transferring the majority of our holdings into accounts she cannot access. The house is in your name only, as are the retirement accounts, but I fear she will try to claim compensation for loss of companionship or some other legal fiction her attorneys will devise. Margaret, you are stronger than you know and smarter than I ever gave you credit for.
I have watched you build your career with determination and grace, watched you maintain your integrity even when others would have taken shortcuts. You have been the better person in our marriage, and you deserve better than the pain I have caused you. Use the evidence wisely. You know the law better than most. Your accounting background has always made you more thorough with research than even my partners. Vivian believes she is facing a grieving widow who will be easy to manipulate. She has no idea she is facing Margaret Chen, with love and profound remorse. Richard, I read the letter 3 times before my hand stopped shaking enough to open the second envelope. Inside were copies of emails, printed photographs, and a small digital recorder. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Vivian's greed laid bare in her own words and actions, but it was the final item that made my breath catch. A handwritten note from Vivian to someone named Jake, dated just 2 weeks before Richard's death. The old fool is getting suspicious, but it doesn't matter now. I have everything I need. Once he's gone, I'll play the grieving mistress card and take his uptight wife for at least 500,000. She's too much of a lady to fight dirty, and I'm not. I set the letter down on Richard's desk and walked to the window. Outside, the climbing roses swayed in the evening breeze, their blooms catching the last rays of sunlight. I thought about all the evenings I had tended them while Richard worked late, or claimed to be working late. I thought about the dinner parties where I had smiled and played the perfect wife, while he exchanged secret glances with a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. The anger came slowly, building like a tide. Not the hot, explosive rage I might have expected, but something colder and more patient. Vivian had made a crucial error in her calculations. She had assumed that Richard's betrayal would leave me broken and vulnerable. She had underestimated the woman who had spent decades navigating the complexities of corporate law, who had built a career on seeing through financial deceptions and understanding human motivations. She had also underestimated the network of relationships I had built over 23 years in one of the city's most respected accounting firms. The next morning, I called my office and extended my bereavement leave for another week. Then I called 3 people: my attorney, James Morrison; my former boss and current senior partner, Detective Sarah Kim from the Seattle Police Department Financial Crimes Unit, whom I had met during a forensic accounting case 5 years earlier, and Rebecca Walsh, an investigative journalist at the Seattle Times who specialized in white collar crime and had been a client of our firm. I met them separately, methodically laying out the evidence Richard had left me. James immediately recognized the legal implications. Vivian's scheme constituted attempted fraud and extortion. Detective Kim was interested in the broader pattern of behavior that suggested Vivian might have targeted other wealthy men in similar ways. Rebecca saw the human interest story that would resonate with readers: the grieving widow who refused to be victimized. The question, James said during our meeting in his downtown office, is how you want to handle this. We can pursue criminal charges, civil litigation, or both. But given the evidence your husband compiled, we're in a very strong position. I thought about Richard, about the 21 years of marriage that had preceded his 4 years of betrayal. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to hate him entirely. His letter had shown a glimmer of the man I had fallen in love with, someone capable of recognizing his mistakes and trying to make amends, even from beyond the grave. I want justice, I told James. But I want it to be clean and final. No drawn out court battles, no media circus. I want Vivian to understand that her actions have consequences, but I don't want to become the kind of person who destroys others for the sake of revenge. The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity. Detective Kim would investigate Vivian's background and financial activities, looking for evidence of similar schemes. Rebecca would write a story about inheritance fraud and the methods predators use to target grieving families, using my situation as a case study, but focusing on the broader social issue. And James would send a letter to Vivian's attorney, detailing the evidence we possessed and making it clear that any attempt to pursue claims against Richard's estate would result in immediate criminal prosecution. 3 weeks after the funeral, Vivian's lawyer called James to arrange a meeting. She came to his office on a Tuesday morning dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. I watched from the conference room as she entered the building, her confidence evident in every step. That confidence evaporated quickly once she realized what we knew. My client was unaware of the extent of the documentation, her attorney said, his voice carefully neutral. She is prepared to sign a waiver of any claims against the estate, in exchange for your agreement not to pursue criminal charges. Your client attempted to defraud a grieving widow based on information she obtained through illegal means, James replied calmly. The waiver is a given, it's not a negotiation point. The question is whether Mrs. Chen chooses to pursue the matter further. I looked across the table at Vivian, seeing her clearly for the first time. Stripped of her manufactured grief and predatory confidence, she was just another person who had made poor choices and was now facing the consequences. Her hands shook as she signed the papers, and I felt something unexpected, not satisfaction or triumph, but a kind of tired sadness for all the energy we had all wasted on this ugliness. There's one more thing, I said as she prepared to leave. Everyone looked at me in surprise. I had remained silent throughout the entire meeting. At the funeral, you told me that Richard never loved me the way he loved you. You were probably right. But here's what you didn't understand. Love without respect, without honesty, without commitment, that's not love at all. That's just selfishness wearing love's mask.
She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, perhaps recognition, perhaps regret. Then she was gone, walking out of our lives as abruptly as she had entered them. Rebecca's article appeared in the Sunday edition of the Seattle Times 6 months later. It was thoughtfully written, focusing on the need for legal protections for surviving spouses and the warning signs of inheritance fraud. My story was told without sensationalism, presented as an example of how preparation and professional support could help families navigate such challenges. Detective Kim's investigation revealed that Vivian had indeed targeted two other widowed men in similar ways over the previous decade, though neither case had progressed as far as mine. Both men agreed to testify, and Vivian eventually pleaded guilty to attempted fraud charges, receiving probation and community service rather than jail time. The legal proceedings were concluded within 8 months of Richard's death. By then I had returned to work, thrown myself back into the familiar rhythms of audits and financial analysis. My colleagues were supportive but not intrusive, understanding that I needed space to process everything that had happened. The real healing began in the garden. I had always found peace among the roses, but in the months following Richard's betrayal and Vivian's defeat, the garden became my sanctuary in a new way. I expanded the beds, adding varieties I had always wanted to try: deep burgundy chrysanthemums, delicate Japanese maples, beds of lavender that released their fragrance with every breeze. Working with my hands in the soil, I began to understand something important: betrayal, like any trauma, changes you. But you get to choose how it changes you. I could have let it make me bitter, suspicious, closed off from future possibilities. Instead, I chose to let it teach me about my own strength, about the difference between love and attachment, about the importance of building a life that was authentically my own. I sold the yacht club membership. Sailing had been Richard's passion, not mine. I kept the house but renovated the study, transforming it into a library filled with the books I had always meant to read. I traveled to places I had wanted to see: a photography tour of Iceland, a cooking class in Tuscany, a meditation retreat in the mountains of British Columbia. At 53, I began learning the violin, something I had dreamed of doing since childhood, but had never made time for. The lessons were humbling. My fingers stumbled over the strings. My bow produced sounds that could charitably be called music only on the best days. But there was something beautiful about beginning again, about discovering that I could still surprise myself. 2 years after Richard's death, I was promoted to managing partner at Morrison and Associates. The ceremony was held in the same conference room where we had confronted Vivian, and I thought about the strange ways life circles back on itself, how moments of darkness can become the foundation for new light. I gave a brief speech to my colleagues about the importance of integrity in our profession, about the trust our clients place in us to handle their most important financial matters. I didn't mention Richard or Vivian directly, but I spoke about how adversity can clarify our values, about how the worst moments in our lives often teach us the most about who we really are. We are guardians of truth in a world that sometimes values convenience over honesty, I said, looking out at the faces of people who had become more than colleagues over the years. They were my professional family, my community of shared purpose. Our work matters not just because of the numbers we track, but because of the lives those numbers represent. Every audit we conduct, every financial statement we verify, every piece of advice we give, these are acts of service to people who trust us to help them build secure futures. The applause was warm and genuine, but what moved me most was the conversation afterward with Sarah, one of our junior associates. She was about 30, brilliant with numbers but still learning to navigate the political complexities of client relationships. "I've been watching you these past 2 years," she said quietly.
The way you handled your personal crisis while maintaining your professional standards, it showed me what real leadership looks like. Not the kind that's all about power and authority, but the kind that's about integrity and resilience. Her words stayed with me as I drove home that evening, past the familiar landmarks of the neighborhood Richard and I had shared for so many years. I thought about the woman I had been when I first walked into this house, younger, perhaps more naive, certainly more willing to accept the surface of things without questioning what lay beneath. That woman had trusted too easily, had assumed that marriage vows and shared history were sufficient protection against betrayal. She had built her identity around being part of a couple, had measured her worth partly through her husband's success and approval. The woman I had become was different. She trusted more carefully but loved more deeply. She had learned to find her center within herself rather than in relationship to others. She understood that real security came not from avoiding all risks, but from knowing she could survive whatever came. The roses were blooming again as I pulled into the driveway, their third spring since Richard's death. I had added new varieties each year, and now the entire south wall of the house was a tapestry of color and fragrance. Neighbors often stopped to admire them, and I had begun sharing cuttings with anyone who showed interest. Inside, the house felt peaceful in a way it never had when Richard was alive. Not empty. I had filled it with music and books, with art I had chosen for my own pleasure rather than to impress guests. The kitchen, where I had prepared countless dinners for two, now hosted cooking experiments for one, elaborate meals I created simply because I enjoyed the process. I poured myself a glass of wine, a Burgundy I had discovered on my trip to France, and sat in the reading chair by the window. The evening light was soft and golden, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors Richard and I had refinished together during our second year in the house. On the table beside my chair was a letter I had been writing to my sister in Portland, updating her on my life and plans. I had been describing my decision to take early retirement in 2 years, to travel more extensively, to perhaps volunteer with organizations that helped other women navigate financial challenges after divorce or widowhood. I have learned, I had written, that the second half of life can be richer than the first, but only if we have the courage to write it ourselves rather than living by scripts others have given us. As the sun set behind the Olympic Mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that rivaled my roses, I thought about forgiveness. Not the kind that excuses harmful behavior or pretends betrayal doesn't matter, but the kind that releases the betrayed person from carrying the weight of another's choices. I had forgiven Richard finally and fully, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to be free from the anger that had threatened to consume me. I understood now that his affair had been about his own insecurities and failures, not about any inadequacy in me or our marriage. I had even in a strange way forgiven Vivian. Her attempt to exploit my grief had been cruel and calculating, but it had also given me the opportunity to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed. In trying to take advantage of what she saw as my weakness, she had inadvertently revealed my power. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Rebecca, the journalist who had written about my case. Margaret, I hope you don't mind my calling. I wanted to let you know about something interesting that's developed. Do you remember how your story led to those new regulations about inheritance fraud? Well, I just heard from the Attorney General's office that they've used those regulations to shut down a network of people who were specifically targeting widows and widowers. Your case helped protect a lot of other families. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in the gathering darkness, thinking about the unexpected ways our pain can serve purposes beyond our understanding. Richard's betrayal and Vivian's scheme had caused me tremendous hurt, but they had also led to legal changes that would protect other people facing similar situations. It reminded me of something my grandmother used to say about her garden: even the storms serve a purpose. They prune away what is weak and reveal what is truly rooted. 3 years after Richard's death, on a morning when the roses were in spectacular bloom, I received an unexpected visitor. Vivian stood on my front porch, looking older and more subdued than I remembered. Her expensive clothes had been replaced by a simple dress, her elaborate manicure by unpolished nails. "I don't expect you to invite me in," she said without preamble. "I just wanted to say something I should have said a long time ago. I'm sorry, not just for the legal trouble, but for the cruelty. What I said to you at the funeral, that was inexcusable. You were grieving, and I made it worse because I was angry and selfish, and thought I could hurt you without consequences." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or self interest. Instead, I saw something I recognized from my own mirror during the darkest days after Richard's death, the exhaustion that comes from carrying shame and regret. Thank you for saying that, I replied. It means more than you might think. She nodded, started to turn away, then paused. I heard about the work you're doing with the widow support group, about the legal changes. I wanted you to know that what you've done, turning something so ugly into something that helps other people, that takes a kind of strength I never had. After she left, I went into the garden and sat among the roses. The morning sun was warm on my face, and I could hear the distant sound of children playing in the neighborhood park. Life continuing, as it always does, in cycles of loss and renewal, ending and beginning. I thought about the woman I had been 4 years ago, standing in that cemetery while a stranger whispered poison in my ear. She could never have imagined the journey that lay ahead, the legal battles and personal revelations, the moments of despair and the gradual dawn of a different kind of happiness. That woman had seen betrayal as an ending. I now understood it as a beginning. Painful, yes, but also full of unexpected possibilities. The marriage I had thought was my foundation turned out to be something I had outgrown without realizing it. Richard's death and Vivian's scheme had forced me to build a new foundation, one anchored in my own values and choices rather than in someone else's presence or approval. At 55, I was learning that the most profound victories are not the ones we win over other people, but the ones we win over our own limitations and fears. I had learned to live fully in my own company, to find joy in small daily rituals, to trust my judgment and intuition in ways I never had when I was part of a couple. The roses nodded in the morning breeze, heavy with blooms that would last only a few weeks before fading. But their roots ran deep, and next year they would bloom again, perhaps even more beautifully. Like everything else in nature, like everything else in life, their beauty lay not in permanence but in the courage to bloom fully, knowing that all seasons pass. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, scrolling to the contact information for a local travel agency. It was time to book that trip to New Zealand. I'd been contemplating. Time to see the Southern Alps and learn to kayak among the fjords. Time to continue writing the second half of my story, the part that belonged entirely to me. The roses would be here when I returned, rooted and resilient, ready for whatever weather came, just like their gardener.